Howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion, and today the Berserker and Slayer Ascendancies were revealed. I've already posted my thoughts on the Slayer, which is cool, but I want to go through the Berserker, which has been the very worst Ascendancy in the game for some time. The Berserker, when it was last overhauled, was made, well, the first time it was overhauled, it was made into actually a premier spellcasting Ascendancy, somewhat by mistake. It was very good at leeching life, but the life leech was not linked to attacks. So the node that was a precursor of the modern Pain Reaver was allowing you to get incredible amounts of life leech on spellcasters. The Berserker was overhauled in order to address that, and to give people a reason to consider going Elementalist and Occultist amongst other spellcasting ascendancies, an Inquisitor and the like. However, in doing so, the Berserker was made absolutely terrible. This has now been fixed, and as of 3.7, I think it will be very realistic to play the Berserker. They're no longer going to be the Marauder Spellcaster Ascendancy, although I'm sure someone will come up with some meme build that does that. But they're now a hard-hitting melee build that eschews defense for full-on offense. Have a strong synergy with two-weapon fighting now. Is probably a better ascendancy for two-weapon fighting than it is for two-handed fighting or for using a shield. It doesn't mean that you can't use a shield or a two-hander, but just that some of the most powerful nodes on the tree seem to work considerably better when you're dealing the maximum possible number of attacks per second. So the old rage mechanic granted a stacking buff and stacking self-inflicted life loss. This has been reworked. Rage's drawback is no longer automatic. It only applies if you take the Rite of Ruin node, which you'll see here. There's this section of the Ascendancy that deals with Rage. You can dip into Rage by taking Crave the Slaughter only, which will give you 1/3 of the benefits of Rage, but none of the drawbacks. Or you can pick up Rite of Ruin as well, and start suffering some drawbacks, but they're not as severe as they used to be. Importantly, Rage can no longer kill you from full life, like it was able to do if you didn't have very much life regen. If you want to see how bad Rage used to be, go to a standard character. Do not do this on a hardcore character. And equip the skill Blood Rage, and step into a map that has players cannot regenerate life. And watch what happens. You'll see that you will take an absolute beating from your own Blood Rage skill. Rage was similar to that, and Berserkers tended to use the Blood Rage skill as well, so you were dealing a staggering amount of damage to yourself every second. As I say, that's been changed, and Rage will no longer outright kill you the way that it used to be able to do. So let's have a quick look at the various aspects of the tree. Firstly, we have sections 1 to 4, which is the critical strike section. There's a really interesting mechanic on node 4, so Blitz, but we'll have a look at Flawless Savagery first, because Flawless Savagery is really powerful. This is just a raw power node. 80% increased critical strike chance for attacks. So that means that if you're using a weapon that has 5% base critical strike, this adds 4%, so that adds 80% of that 5% base, so you're gaining an extra 4% chance to deal a critical strike. You're going from 5% to 9%. If you also have 3 power charges, it will still add 4% flat, but it'll be from a higher base than 5%. That's fairly useful. You can get quite a lot of increased critical strike chance, and you will need it if you're making a critical strike build. You'll want to get quite a lot of that. And it works better with weapons that have an inherently higher critical strike chance. It also synergizes well with the increased critical strikes support gem. But now we've got the interesting bit. Adds 20 to 30 physical damage to attacks if you've dealt a critical strike recently. Now 20 to 30 physical damage to attacks is a lot more than it sounds. That's something like 2 steel rings. And obviously steel rings is something you can only get quite late in the game. So this is a very powerful mod because it scales so well. Flat physical damage doesn't look very good when you see the numbers, but when you actually equip it on your character, it's something that you can scale in a lot of different ways and get a lot more than just that 25 average damage out of it. Additionally, something that's important with flat physical damage is that it works better if you're making fast, frequent, small hits than if you're doing big, massive smashes with a two-handed weapon. And that's why I said that this Ascendancy, it's one of the reasons I said this Ascendancy is really good with two-weapon fighting. To have dealt a critical strike recently means you've dealt one in the last 4 seconds. If you're dealing an average of 1 critical strike per 4 seconds, then you will have this effect. You'll have this buff up approximately 70% of the time. If you're dealing critical strikes approximately once per 2 seconds in combat, you'll have this buff up much more than that. You'll have it up something like 85 to 90% of the time. Lastly, you get 30% increased critical strike multiplier. This is great. I don't think anyone needs to really say much about how good critical strike multiplier is. It's a very powerful mod that is very hard to get in large quantities elsewhere. 30% is not a massive amount of it, but it's pretty good, given that you're getting so much other value out of Flawless Savagery. I'm going to go as far as to say that if you're playing a Berserker, you probably want to take the Flawless Savagery node. But I wanted to point out some of the things that this 20 to 30 physical damage to attacks particularly synergizes with. Starforge. Starforge has 400 to 500% increased physical damage on the weapon. This scales extremely well with anything that gives plus flat physical. Voidforge. This is even stronger. Voidforge, you gain 300% of weapon physical damage as extra damage of a random element. So essentially you're getting an extra 300% benefit from the, which is multiplicative from this mod. And lastly, something that I think might have a little bit of meme value is for this entire section is going to come up with poison. And poison scales off the amount of physical damage and chaos damage combined that you do. And so we'll come back to the wasp nest in a sec, but I think it's actually one of those weapons that may just be a little bit better than people expect on a Berserker. However, that is getting into meme category. We'll get there when we get to Blitz. So now let's have a look at the Blitz section as well. Blitz introduces a new type of charge that you can only get via the Blitz node in the Ascendancy. 2% more attack speed per Blitz charge. And you can get as many as 20 of these. So that's potentially 40% more attack speed. As I've said before, more means a multiplier. If your character's DPS is 1 million damage per second without this node, and you can sustain 20 blitz charges, then those blitz charges would potentially add as much as, would take you from 1 million to 1.4 million. However, there is a drawback to this node as well. 10% reduced critical strike chance per blitz charge. So imagine that you're swinging so fast that you're starting to get less and less and less accurate. Note that Flawless Savagery already gave you plus 80% increased crit chance. So this is basically the first 8 negate that, and then the next 12 actually do send you down into the negative crit chance for having these nodes. You go now minus 120% crit chance does not mean that you cannot crit. It means that you need to have critical strike chance on other pieces of equipment or the rest of your passive tree in order to be able to crit. If you're playing a critical strike build, you absolutely will have enough that this will be a meaningful decrease in your chance of getting crits, but will not totally block you out of getting critical strikes. Now you gain a blitz charge when you crit. This is going to mean that your number of blitz charges you'll probably be able to sustain the full 20, I think, in most encounters, except where you're forced to stand toe-to-toe with a monster for an extended period of time, and then have a period where you can't fight anything. So, you've been fighting this boss, and then you go an extended period where you can't hit it. In any case, now if we go back to the wasp nest, you'll notice that this weapon deals additional chaos damage against enemies that are afflicted by a bunch of poisons. Because you're attacking so fast, you'll get to 5 poisons on an enemy really quickly, then you'll get all this extra chaos damage. This deals physical and chaos damage as a weapon overall, and so I think this actually, as much as it may seem silly, this may be a viable weapon to use on the Berserker if you're scaling poison with it. We'll see how that goes. I'm not absolutely confident that I'm right on that front, and it'll be something I will be looking at in Path of Building. Anyways, that's the critical strike section of the tree. I think it's very compelling to take those 4 points on any build that is 2-weapon fighting, and particularly Flawless Savagery's 20 to 30 increased physical damage is amazing on Facebreaker builds. Facebreaker builds will gain a staggering amount of extra damage from that because they do 600 to 800% more damage with unarmed attacks. So if you're playing Facebreaker, you absolutely must take Flawless Savagery. If you're playing Voidforge, you absolutely must take Flawless Savagery. And if you're playing 2-weapon fighting, I think you should take both of these nodes. I think it's a little bit harder to justify taking Blitz on some other builds, just because there's so much else in the tree that while Blitz is going to be strong on a sword and board Berserker or on a 2-handed weapon Berserker, I think it might get pipped out by some of the other nodes. Next up we have the Warcry nodes, 5 and 6. Now, these give you a powerful instant heal. I will say that you absolutely must take the nodes on the passive tree, which are near the Marauder starting area, that make Warcries instant. You absolutely must take them if you're going to consider taking Warbringer. Restoring 25% of life and mana when you use a Warcry is considerable. This is a very potent instant heal. Berserkers typically will have around 6,000 hit points at endgame, so this is just a panic button that you can hit for 1,500 instant healing. There are some flasks that can do more than that, but they have drawbacks, like the Quartz Flask, Forbidden Taste, which can recover all of your life in an instant, but then deals a considerable amount of chaos damage to you over time. This is just a no drawback instant heal that also has additional effects. Additionally, as a defensive application, you can use this with Enduring Cry to gain endurance charges. Endurance charges are great because they will then allow you to proc a long-lasting Immortal Call. Immortal Call's being changed, so I don't know if we're still going to be using it with Cast When Damage Taken or if something else will be coming in, but endurance charges are good on their own anyway, and Immortal Call is certainly gaining some new unique abilities and starting to work partially against elemental damage as well. So yeah, Immortal Call looks like it will be gaining quite a bit here. If you're taking this node, you'll be able to use Immortal Call a lot. Alternately, instead of the defensive application of using Enduring Cry, and if you do use Enduring Cry, quality the gem as soon as you can because it gains a lot from quality. The offensive application is Abyssal Cry. Abyssal Cry is a war cry that doesn't get used a huge amount. What it does is it taunts all nearby enemies, slows them considerably, and curses them so that if they die during the secondary duration of the skill, they will explode for 8% of their maximum life as chaos damage on kill. This is absolutely hilarious and quite powerful in delves, where there's a lot of ultra densely packed trash mobs, and there's also a smaller number of very durable, very tanky rare monsters. If you can curse a rare monster and kill it, the explosion will kill all of the surrounding trash. On the flip side, if you can curse a whole pack of the trash mobs and then make an AoE attack that hits lots of them, you have a potential for the explosions to not just kill all of the trash mobs that you might have missed with your main attack, but also to kill durable rare monsters in the area as well. Abyssal Cry is a lot of fun to use too. So I can't currently endorse using Rallying Cry. I just don't think it does enough outside extremely niche applications, and that's the third Warcry skill. But I do think that the other two have uses. All in all, I think Warbringer is a node that you're probably not going to default to taking on a Berserker, but there certainly will be builds that want it. Next up we have the leech side of things, so Pain Reaver. Now, the Berserker is not the leech specialist that the Slayer is. And I think that just needs to be said. That is the Slayer's core identity. They are the leech specialist. But the Berserker still gets quite a bit here. It's gaining considerable mana leech from Pain Reaver, and this is useful. It allows you to comfortably reserve anywhere from 85 to 92% of your mana, not need to use a mana flask, and be confident that you won't run out of mana while spamming skills unless you're just consistently missing. You're not going to be missing everything unless you're trying to attack an area that there is no monster in. Additionally, these conditional attack speed boosts and recovery boosts from Life Leech are significant, but not reliable enough that I think they're okay, but not exceptional. 25% increased attack speed is a lot, but it only applies when you've been hit recently. This is good while mapping, and it's good against some bosses, but not all bosses. Against bosses like Exile that have big telegraphed attacks that can instantly kill you, and particularly against Shaper, Elder, and Uber Elder and the like, this can be a little bit less valuable than it would otherwise be. This increased recovery per second from Life Leech when you've taken a Savage hit recently is also something that will help you quite often, but sometimes some of the most dangerous scenarios you find yourself in don't involve Savage hits. And here I'm thinking of the porcupine monsters that explode into a shower of spikes when they're killed. Those porcupine explosions will not be individually Savage hits. However, collectively, a bunch of them hitting you can knock you out completely, and 50% increased maximum total recovery, well, it won't even kick in. But even if it does kick in, it's probably not enough to keep you alive. So for that reason, I just think of these as very minor side effects. The key thing that you're getting here is 2% dual leech, and whilst I think that's going to sometimes be compelling, if you can get it elsewhere on the tree, take it elsewhere on the tree. But if you can't, Pain Reaver is certainly an option. Now we get to the rage side of things. Grr, Hulk, Smash. Rage is a powerful momentum mechanic that's been transformed. You don't want to stop moving, you don't want to stop swinging, you don't want to stop killing. Like other charges, like charges, Power, Frenzy, and Endurance charges, you want to keep killing monsters, and it compels you to go faster and faster and faster in order to keep up the powerful buffs. The top end of just the first node, so this is Crave the Slaughter, is getting 12% chance to deal double damage, 50% increased damage, 25% increased attack speed, and 10% increased move speed. Now that would be insane. However, you're not always going to have that at full power. You gain 1 rage on hit when you attack, but this is capped at once per 0.3 seconds. So it's going to take you at least 15 seconds to get up to 50 rage, and in practice, I think it will take considerably longer than 15 seconds to get up to 50. You have a 1% chance to deal double damage for every 4 rage, and you'll notice that this is not part of the base effects of rage, and so it's not going to get tripled by Rite of Ruin. Your maximum rage is 50, and you lose 2 rage per second, basically, if you have not been hit or gained rage recently. So once you're outside combat, you're going to start losing rage at 2 per second. That is a considerable amount of rage loss, but I think in practice, you're not going to be in this state of not being hit or gained rage recently all that often. One thing that's really noticeable with the Berserker is that it is a build that does not want to be doubling back in maps. You will really, really hate in any situation where you're forced to take a 10 or 15 second doubling back loop in a map. A good example of this would be a map like Chateau. Chateau is going to be terrible on a Berserker because it's quite difficult to path through the entire map without taking at least a couple of 5-second detours where you're not killing anything. And during that period, you're going to start losing your rage, and so you're going to be losing movement speed, you're going to be losing damage, you're going to be losing attack speed. On the flip side, straightforward maps like Strand, like Atoll, like Plateau, maps that you can very comfortably path around will be much more suited to the Berserker. Next up, we have the option of doubling down on rage with Rite of Ruin. Rite of Ruin inflicts a considerable drawback, as does Aspect of Carnage, the last node that we haven't yet covered. The base effects of having rage are tripled. So that's not the 1% chance to deal double damage per 4 rage, but the other effects of rage here. So that's that is the 1% increased attack damage per 1 rage, 1% increased attack speed per 2 rage, and 1% movement speed per 5 rage. You also have this drawback where you lose as much as 5% of life per second per rage. This doesn't apply while you are not losing rage. Now, what does this mean? Ultimately, this is going to severely cut into your life leech, this life loss here. So the defensive benefits of life leech are going to be seriously, seriously hurt by this section here. You're also probably using Blood Rage as well as a Berserker, and so the combination of degeneration that you're suffering will be considerable. Essentially, taking Rite of Ruin is a big, big cost. You're going to be really paying for that by taking a lot of damage. However, the top end is having 150% increased damage, 75% increased attack speed, and 30% move speed. This is absolutely batshit insane. This is incredibly powerful. In addition, you still keep your 12% chance to deal double damage when at the rage cap, and you also gain immunity to stun when you're at high rage. All this together makes you a very formidable damage dealing machine. I think Rite of Ruin is going to be a polarizing node. Most Berserkers are going to take it, but a good number of players are going to try it out, decide it's definitely not for them, and unspec it, and then go into something else with those other nodes, with those other passive points that doesn't cause the same amount of damage to themselves. That's going to be your choice. Play around with it. I recommend starting with Rite of Ruin. Not necessarily, when I say starting, not necessarily taking it as your Cruel Labyrinth, but I recommend taking it by the time you've done the Eternal Labyrinth. Experiment with it, see how it feels for you, and then decide whether you want to stick with it or not. Lastly, we have the all-in damage node, Aspect of Carnage. This has not been changed. It hasn't needed to be changed. It was potentially the best node on the old Berserker tree. Now, I'm too old to have ever said YOLO when it was allegedly cool, but this node is how you say YOLO. 10% increased damage taken sucks. It's a much more severe drawback than it looks. If you've got 5,500 health, this makes it like you've got 5,000 health in terms of your overall survivability. But you also need to, compared to a character that's got 5,000 health, you also need 10% more recovery in order to get the same survivability. So 5,500 health with Aspect of Carnage is quite a bit worse than 5,000 health without it. So that is a very real drawback, but 40% more damage is huge. There is so much damage that you're getting out of this node, and it's only 2 Ascendancy points. So that is actually something that is very much a node with a serious drawback, but serious power that makes it worthwhile. I do recommend that you probably take this and test it out, but again, just like Rite of Ruin, if you find that the drawback is too serious, spec out of it. Also, if you're playing in hardcore, I wouldn't take Rite of Ruin or Aspect of Carnage lightly. Maybe you decide that you do want to go with them, but you're playing Russian roulette. Now, one thing that's missing here that's important is that there are no charge synergies on the entire tree. Any charge generation your build desires to have, you will need to get from the main tree, the main passive tree. Warbringer and Endurance charges will help on this, so that's from Enduring Cry. But otherwise, you're looking at support gems like Power Charge on Critical, or skills like Blood Rage, or potentially some skills that are out of favor at the moment, but that do the same thing like Frenzy. These are all things you can consider. Of note, you have no real Power Charge generation or synergy at all, and a lot of the nodes up the top that are critical strike related are very much things that you will want to have power charges somewhere on your build. It's going to be up to you how you address that. Stormbrand and power charge on crit is one solution that some players have been very happy with, and you can certainly experiment with that. Alternately, there's lots of other ways you can try and generate power charges, and I'll leave the decision as to how to do that up to you. In terms of overall build ideas, now these are all subject to change when information on skill gems is revealed, but I think there's some things that we can say at the moment. First up, 2-weapon fighting, physical damage with damaging rage. Here, you're going to want to take Blitz, you're going to want to take Rite of Ruin. That locks you out of taking anything else. You're going to need to solve leeching life and mana somewhere else on the normal passive tree, but you have a staggering amount of damage and very, very, very fast hits, which then should keep you topped up on rage all of the time. You're going to need blood rage as well, and so that does actually solve the life leech side of things. You've still got to solve mana somehow, and you're looking at dealing a lot of damage with critical strikes. This could be used with any melee skill realistically, anything from double strike through to Reeve could conceivably be done here. And a lot of that is just going to come down to when the skill gems get revealed. Second option that I want to raise is 2-weapon fighting physical damage without damaging rage. So in this context, you're going to want to take Blitz again. Blitz because you're 2-weapon fighting. You just have to take it. It's so good. I think at this point you're going to take Crave the Slaughter for rage, but you're not going to go into the damaging rage side of things from Rite of Ruin. And then you're going to pick up Pain Reaver. Pain Reaver solves all of your life and mana leech issues, and so you're then going to have a lot more survivability and a lot more mana sustain. However, you don't get quite as much damage as you would take if you went to Rite of Ruin. Next up, Tectonic Slam with Instant Warcries. Now, Instant Warcries are used for Enduring Cry, which then gives you a large amount of endurance charges. You will need to quality your Enduring Cry quickly for this build. For this, I would suggest that you go a big two-hander, that you take your Instant Warcry node, and then you take the entirety of the Rage node, and then you pick any one of 2, 8, and 14. So you're going to start with 6, you're going to take 12, and then you'll either go 2, which will give you some critical strike, synergies, or you're going to go 8 for the leech, or you're going to go 14 just for the full-on extra damage. Next up, I want to suggest a Voidforge build. Voidforge with damaging rage. So here, you're only going to take Flawless Savagery. We're going to skip Blitz because Voidforge doesn't attack fast enough to get the full benefit from Blitz. You're not going to be dealing enough critical strikes in order to sustain a high number of Blitz charges. We're then going to take 8 for Pain Reaver to get to cover the leech issues, and then we're going to take Rite of Ruin so that you've got the damaging rage, all the benefits that come with Rite of Ruin and damaging rage. If you prefer not to take the Rite of Ruin node, you can always take, you can go without damaging rage, take Aspect of Carnage instead of Rite of Ruin, and I think there's a lot of benefit to that approach too. Next up, we have a couple of more meme builds. First up, there is the Poison with Wasp Nest that I mentioned before. So for this, you're going to want to take 2 and 4, so that is Blitz. You're then going to want to take the Instant War Cries. You're going to be using that with Abyssal Cry here. And then we're going to take 10, Crave the Slaughter, so that is basically just the first part of the Rage tree. Instant Warcries will let you use Abyssal Cry effectively, which is important because you will have to get a fair amount of chaos damage scaling on the tree, and then I don't know how well this will work, but I think there's a little bit of fun to be had with it. Lastly, the Berserker, everyone thinks of it as a melee Ascendancy, but there's actually nothing forcing you into melee weapons here. And so, as a little bit of a meme build, I thought, what could be sillier than a Fizz Chaos Wander using Power Siphon and or Kinetic Blast as a Berserker. And surprisingly, a lot of these nodes have quite a lot of value for characters that are, that are using physical wands. Rite of Ruin is really, really strong for a physical damage wander. Flawless Savagery gives you considerable physical damage to attacks if you've dealt a critical strike recently, and it actually goes as far as to take Blitz as well, because you're going to be dealing a lot of critical strikes here. You'll be Physical and Chaos in terms of the damage types that you'll be scaling, because this Flawless Savagery bonus seems to be quite considerable. There may be other ways to build a Berserker Wander that are even more effective, and I'm just not sure whether this is going to work that well or not, but it seems like an interesting option to try. Lastly, there's Righteous Fire with Instant Warcry, which was a tried and tested build before the last Berserker set of changes. The idea here is that you deal considerable damage. You're using Righteous Fire to deal your damage, and you then use Instant Warcries in conjunction with Warbringer in order to top up your health. And then when you've got enough fire resistance, you then pick up Aspect of Carnage to deal enormous amounts of additional damage. The rest of the tree is a little bit more difficult to see where I would go with it, but this was a tried and tested Berserker build back several leagues ago. Whilst I think Juggernaut is probably stronger overall now as a Righteous Fire build, you can actually start out as a Berserker from normal Labyrinth and start using Righteous Fire immediately. Then respec to Juggernaut later in your character's career once you've got enough once you've got enough regeneration that you no longer need the Warbringer's massive 25% life regen when you use a Warcry. So those are some of the thoughts I've had for using the new Berserker. I think this is a solid to strong Ascendancy with very much a damage at any cost feel to it. I think it should be quite a bit of fun to play around with, and I'm curious to know your ideas on it. Anyways, have a good one.